We would have brought that last week, and it may fall, so don't panic. But my son uses it as a robot, so it was in the playroom, and we didn't know where it had gone. Here we go. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Leave. No, leave. Some of you sit in these pews assuming that I, as your new pastor, stand in front of you with all the answers and abilities to fix all of your problems. And if you think that, you should know now that that probably is not going to happen, and you might get upset over that, so you can go ahead and leave. Because if I had the one-size-fits-all method for churches, I would probably not be standing here. Like I said last week, I can't compete. I can't compete in a world that responds to fear instead of love. I can't even compete with soccer on Sundays, baseball on Wednesdays, or exhausting activities and work on Saturdays. Just like you, I am one faithful person stuck during a frustrating time of transition, trying to figure out how to be loving and faithful in 2016. As I've mentioned to you in the past, there are people under 50 and maybe even older in a lot of pews throughout the country who cannot tell you the stories that should be the foundation of their faith. They cannot tell you stories beyond what they learned at a 5th grade level. If I say the name Jesse, even though it is read in almost every church every year, most people have no idea who that is and what the significance of that name means. Like I said last week, we are in a time of major transition that occurs every 500 years, and that is a scary time. It is scary. And if you think you are going to leave once the newness wears out, or I haven't fixed everything, or I finally said something really, really wrong, or someone else said something wrong, or maybe you moved just a little too far, or timing or life or weird things happen, then go ahead and go. Leave. Ironically, this pattern of leaving is biblical. Even though many do not know the faith stories, we still ironically are finding ways to live its patterns out. Exiles, wilderness, famines, shipwrecks, and death are all part of the pattern that we find in our faith stories. Our faith stories that are ones of resurrection and rebirth. And so if you leave, while the journey is definitely difficult, those who leave may miss the promised land, the new temple, the birth of Christ, the empty tomb. People who leave usually put their faith in humanity, but instead, if you put your faith in God, you will miss, if you leave, seeing how God can work even when humanity cannot do it. And even if you may not end up seeing it like some others who were wandering in the wilderness, you can help prepare the future for it. You see, as depressing as the numbers and the facts and the information can be in 2016, I find myself excited every day serving the church for the potential of rebirth and creativity. It is difficult for me to stay upset. And some may say I'm optimistic, but really I'm not. I'm very realistic. I'm realistic that as budgets go down, the church is forced to think creatively. As staff get cut, lay people have to step up and lead and learn their faith. As people spread out, technology gets used to reach beyond the pews. Pastors and leaders are becoming more prophetic because they can finally raise their voices to say what God has called them to say because none of them are getting paid enough not to. Instead, they are living out the life that the prophets who spoke on behalf of God. They are speaking when no one will listen or liked what they had to say. They are crying out against cookie-cutter theology that has dominated the current image of Christianity. And they are doing that through blogs and Facebook and other online vehicles to show that where once many of us thought we stood alone in our thoughts, we are now emerging together in a movement that is painful in many ways, but is the movement that is able to part the seas and provide bread for everyone in miraculous ways. It is an exciting time to be a part of the church, to think outside the box and be doing the work that God has called us to do. But leave. Leave if you do not want to do the work. Leave if you're only going to complain. Leave if you think God can only work in megachurch mentality. Leave if you were just here for your personal Jesus therapy session. Leave if you don't want to know God's presence through a community that loves everyone, including you. Leave if you don't want to be part of something big. You see, it doesn't take many. We are so sometimes in fear of numbers that we forget that with love and with God, it may just take 12 or even 1 to change everything. Do you want to be a part of that change? If you do, and I hope you do, here are some ways I have been called to help you. In my other gig as minister for families and children at Disciples Home Missions, I have spent the last 3 years doing major research and study, which has truly changed my image of the best way to serve those people who sit in our pews all throughout the country at all ages. Initially, when people hear my job title, they assume that my job is children, but I've found that that is not to be true. In fact, it's just the opposite. I've been called at this time in my ministry to help the adults. Those who are the Hannahs, the Elkanahs, the Annas, the Simeons, the Elis. If we are truly able to help our children grow in the faith, we must be willing to actually change how ministry has been done over the last 50 years. The shift has to be refocusing on all ages coming together in intentional is the key word there, intentional intergenerational ways in worship, in learning, at home, and in mission. That is what the and sign is at the beginning or on the front of your bulletin today. This is the image that family and children's and youth ministry throughout the country are starting to use to say that we are not going to work in our segregated silos anymore, but that we are going to come back together and work as one, because we need to come back together. Age segregation is one of the primary reasons the church is suffering. The moment we started dividing groups by age as a response to society's needs and not faith needs is the moment we segregated many people right out of the church. Over the past 10 years, major studies have been done to show that youth do not have a language or understanding of their faith. Many of these youth who were part of these surveys and questions are now young adults and even young families. And they find that churches are seeking ways to attract them, but that actually hasn't kept them or kept them faithful. Churches need to realize that what people really want at all ages is to be included in the first place. Entertaining may bring somebody in, but it won't keep them there. Rachel Evans, who is a significant voice for the millennial generation of those who are faithful, says this: "You can't hand us a latte and then go about business as usual and expect us to stick around. We're not leaving the church because we don't find the cool factor there. We are leaving the church because we don't find Jesus there." Like every generation before ours and every generation after, deep down, We long for Jesus. You see, 1 hour on Sunday morning, maybe 2, will not make you faithful. It will not make your children know a loving God and a deeper faith that can hold us through all the difficult challenges in life. And I wrestle each day with my job both here and for the national level of how to equip those lost generations and people who still seek Jesus, who want Jesus in their homes and in their lives. I think of the Hannahs and other parents wanting to cloak their kids in God's guidance. I think of the leaders like Eli and the people who are family by association, like Annas and Simeons. Those who know how to recognize Jesus and still know the Bible stories. Or even Mary and Joseph, the parents who, after all that they had experienced, are still surprised that their son is something special. But with at least 2 generations currently feeling ill-equipped to lead their families in faith, beyond attending a board meeting or 2, we have all put ourselves in a very difficult position. As our society has gotten more busy, we have started to be even more disconnected, and we wait for nothing, especially Jesus. A lot of times the image I use when doing workshops is the dog training image. I've said that we train our dogs better than we train our children in our faith. Here's why. If you have ever had a dog and you've gone to training class, unless you've had a lot of money, you don't leave your dog there. You don't leave it with the trainer and then leave and go, I'll be back once it knows how to sit. Unless you have a lot of money, and then you can get away with that. But usually you have to stay with your dog. And you have to train it and implement what you learned within that hour through the rest of the week so that you can then move with your dog to the next level. And yet we drop off our children and hope 1 or 2 people are able to teach them every story without implementing it within our homes throughout the week. You see, it takes everyone. It takes families at home doing faith every day. It takes people supporting those families and those parents, like grandparents or other mentors. It takes everyone, especially those in older generations who still automatically know the Bible stories as part of their day-to-day lives. It's not about entertaining, it's about intentionally engaging. Even though there are exceptions to every rule, this isn't rocket science. Look whose kids are usually still in the church and faithful. Statistics even show that those children who remain in church as adults are the ones whose parents were involved in their faith, both in the home and church, or camp. There are still lots of pastor kids in the church. They did not all rebel and go the opposite direction. And those children remained in church, but never went to Sunday school, never left, just came with grandma and sat there. They have a higher average of staying in church as adults than those who came to Sunday school or youth group and were taken out of the church each week. 1 in 10 youth currently stay in the church. 1 in 10. Have you ever noticed that the kids who are closest to the camp counselors are the ones who stick around? Like me. My parents weren't overly faithful people, but I definitely had more than 5 adults, and that's what you have to have. 5 adults at least to show how to be faithful and to live that way. There's also a study that says most 15-year-old girls don't even trust 3 adults in general. So to have 5 faithful adults, not necessarily faithful like them, but the tools to become faithful. You see, that is my call and my role amongst the community. To move away from the consumeristic me mentalities and move back toward the faithful Christian mentality of community. We need to be patient like the Annas and Simeons and ready for Jesus to come. We need to give coats to all of our children and trust and cloak them that God is working through our leaders like Eli. Community includes all ages, from the boy who gave bread and fish to Samuel to the teenage Jesus. Stories of all ages and leadership and insights are found in the Bible and in the world. So why do we keep separating out and missing opportunities to experience God in all forms at all ages. So how do we do this? There are 5 steps that we kind of use as our checklist for the national church, general church, because of Canada. First is sacred space and ritual. Find ways within both the home and church to have a sacred space and sacred rituals, like bedtime routines. Sacred story. Find ways to share stories with one another, personal stories, biblical stories, stories of faith. Sacred conversation and language. There is a difference between the word lucky and blessed. Use some language that is faithful. Sacred meals, like communion, but even sacred meals that happen when you're eating McDonald's in a car driving to an event. Take that time to remember God. And sacred steps and mission. Actually going out from this place and doing the work that God has called us to do. Children Worship and Wonder, a program that I am involved in, has a lot of these elements. And while I encourage you to come through the drive-thru to get your ashes so that you can show others that you have been blessed through the day, I encourage you to come back at 7 o'clock because the Ash Wednesday service will include this program as part of the evening service. And while it is my job to help make sure that we continue to find ways to have these elements in worship, my job is also to help you, whether it be through text messaging, Facebook, or sending Susan a really bad video of my sermon last week, is to help you stay connected and throughout the week. Through technology, social media, simple at-home interactions and changes, you may actually be able to find a little more Jesus in your life. But that's only if you're willing to do the little steps and work and wait. Little steps do go a long way, but you still have to start moving. If you don't want to move, then leave. Leave. I don't have the energy to force you to stay, and nobody else does either. But if you want to stay, then we sing. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. If you would like to be a part of this story, we invite you to come forward.